Tape number 2, interview with Mr. Larry Pick, December 8th, 1996. We were talking about how you moved to Brno and how your parents decided to apply for affidavits in.
Well, they wrote to their cousins. My mother had cousins living there who came to 1923, some even earlier, to the United States. And one cousin turned us down. He had given too many affidavits already. His brother gave my brother and to me an affidavit. And another cousin on my mother's side gave an affidavit to my parents. That was in 1938. And of course, by that time, that was after the so-called Crystal Night, 9th of November, 1938. The Jews tried to get out of Germany in any way possible. And the quota for people born in Germany was, at the annual quota, was 28,500. So it was like in a bakery. You got a number. And my brother was lucky or smart, and he went in person to the American consulate in Stuttgart, got himself his number. Well, my parents lived in Brno, and the consulate was in Prague, so they wrote, which in one day could mean half a year. One day, it's like when you're crowded, you come to a bakery, it's very crowded. You come 3 minutes later, it means half an hour waiting. And we had relatively speaking, a very high number. The quota did not go by the citizenship. The quota goes by where you were born. And in contrast to today, it was very hard to enter a country, especially as a Jew, I guess, as anybody. And we lived in Brno, waiting, getting again only together with Jews, with refugees from Germany. My father had found a manufacturer of hides, a tannery called Schwarzkopf. It was owned by a Jew. And leather was a little short supply, and once in a while, every so often, he gave my father some hides, or he told his employees to give my father some hides, which he sold. It was easy to sell to shoemakers. And with that markup, we lived off from this markup. Also, my father, then Czech Jews started to immigrate. They saw the handwriting on the wall much better. He was like an agent, like a middleman. He helped them sell their furniture and got a commission. And that's how what we lived on.
Did you go to school?
I went in Czechoslovakia. I went first to a school to learn English, only English. It was called the Victoria College. It was no college. It had a fancy name. I was the youngest there. I was about 15. When this course ended, there was a high school my parents sent me to, and a Jewish high school. The Jews could not go anymore to public school. A Jewish high school in Brno, in Brünn.
Even in Brno?
Even in Brünn, yes. It was occupied by the Germans.
It was already occupied?
Yes. Yeah. Let me go back for a moment and tell you that in 1939, in March 1939, the Germans occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia, and we had I forgot, it's the rolls or the milk delivered in the morning, and my mother opened the door to receive it. She said good morning to the person, and that person said, ab heute, as of today, you don't say good morning anymore, you say Heil Hitler. That's how we found out that the Germans had marched into occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia.
How did that affect your personal life, other than having to go to a Jewish school? What incidents?
Well, certainly now we were under the same rules like in Germany, more or less. You could not go to a movie. You were very restricted with your movement as a Jew. You At that time, I don't think we were a star already. It came later, the Jewish star. But you could not do things freely. Besides coming back to it, to the Jewish school, which was in Czech. And while I spoke Czech, I couldn't follow the curriculum in Czech. And after the end of the lesson, one of the students who spoke Czech and German fluently translated briefly what it was all about. But after a few days, I figured that's a plain waste of time. And during recess, I just walked out of that school. And I knew better. I was afraid to come home and say I walked out of the school. My parents wouldn't have liked that. And I got myself a job on my own as an apprentice, as a volunteer, because I wasn't paid, in a Jewish shop, electrical appliances, who also made electrical installations. And I worked on new buildings. It was winter time. It was cold because everything was open, and I helped install electrical wiring in that building. When that building was finished, I was out of a job because, after all, the company was owned Jewish, was owned by a Jew, and he didn't get any new work, and I was out of a job. And this time my father got me a job as a plater. A plater is chrome plating and nickel plating at a job which was owned by a Jew. Abel was his name. He barely made a living. He made a living by paying miserable wages. That's how otherwise he couldn't exist. I got 10 crowns a week. 10 crowns means the streetcar back and forth was each time to his place was 1 crown. So I just made enough to pay for the streetcar. My parents gave me a little money. I worked in the assets. There was no exhaust to speak of. There was no environmental protection. The rubber gloves were worn. He claimed he couldn't get new ones. This acid went on your fingers, brown acid from the chrome plating, which we had. We got it off then with bleach. Yeah, you put that on your skin. I mean,
Burns.
things were a little different than nowadays. You didn't leave it on too long, otherwise it would burn. And I worked there 5.5 days a week, I think, until 2 or 3 o'clock Saturdays.
How did the Jewish community react to the new rules?
The Jewish community got together.
Was there a Judenrat there or a Jewish
No, I
Gemeinde?
guess the people who were president of the Jewish community were were running it, I should say. And since there were now more refugees living in Brno, they got together and made all kinds of institutions. When the Germans, I come back to that right away, when the Germans in March 1939 occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia, our whole house was occupied by the Gestapo, and of course we were thrown out. Some of our furniture we had to leave behind, and we were given, or we found, I don't know how, we had a 1-room apartment in a 5-story on the 5th floor walk up. When I say 1 room, it's not 1 bedroom and a living room. 1 room in Europe is 1 room. That's living room, bedroom, whatever you want to call it. We had in a little kitchenette which was divided by a curtain. We had a 2-burner stove, and we had a bathroom with a bathtub. We had no refrigerator or anything like that. And in this walk up, we lived approximately from April, May 1939 until our deportation. The building was owned by a Jewish fellow. He was a cantor. He lived on the ground floor. It was a very limited life. I remember every Sunday people came to us like a circle and discussed what they should do and how it affected them. One was a fellow who made orthopedic insoles. There was an elderly man. He could hardly make those 5 stories high on the steps. He caught his breath on every floor, but he wanted to be there too. And my mother usually had somebody bake the cake because we didn't have a stove. We just had a burner. And it was more flour and water than, believe me, than eggs and sugar.
Were these people you knew from Stuttgart or
No,
from?
no, they are all people we knew from Teplicina. And we were there. I was going every day to that plating place until our deportation. The Jewish community got together, as I said before, and opened up, well, you would call it a soup kitchen here, but it was better, had much better class than soup kitchen. It has waiters. I don't know, remember if it had a tablecloth, but for 5 crowns you got a fairly decent meal. And the people were mostly refugees, and whether it was subsidized, I don't know.
Did people leave?
Yes, primarily, as I said, Czech Jews left, and my father helped them sell their furniture, making a little commission on it. One friend of ours left for Brazil because the wife had a son there from a previous marriage who helped him to get to Brazil.
Were there any, or do you recall any personal violent situations?
Yes, at one time, there was a Jewish coffee house, like people would sit and read a paper or have a cup of coffee. The Gestapo came and emptied the whole, whoever was there, and they were never heard of again. Their ashes were sent back with their watch or whatever they had, clothing, a couple of weeks later to the people.
Was anybody arrested?
Well, that was a kind of arrest, I would think. They were deported. Arresting, not to my knowledge. Once I risked my life. I risked my life in a stupid way only a teenager can do. I had a crush on Diana Durbin, and there was a movie playing Diana Durbin, and Jews were not permitted. If you were caught, I mean, it wasn't a picnic. But I went and saw that movie, Diana Durbin movie. The life had become isolated. Life had become, you were satisfied with very little. I mean, we got the ration stamps on our ration for food.
From whom?
From the authorities. On the ration stamps, they were less than the other population got. Was a J was stamped. But when you went with those ration stamps you could go to any store you wanted. To a Czech store, you usually got a little bit more even than was on the stamps. They tried to help in a way. I remember there was a grocery store half a block from us, who the guy was a very decent fellow, a small little grocery store. And there were people he waited on, and when my turn came, he still didn't wait on me, and I said to myself, now he became a Nazi already too, but he waited until everybody left the store, and then he stretched out his hand and he said, told me in Czech, "Here's my hand, the hand of an honest Czech man. I'm sorry for you." And he gave me some.
Who were your personal friends, your school, your age friends? What did you
My
do
age
for social
friends,
life?
we played soccer, but just 3 or 4 of us on the street or in the house. The fellow I worked for had 2 daughters. Where I was in the plating shop, and they invited me. They had a circle of friends, but I was a little embarrassed because after I came, somebody said, "How come we suddenly speak German?" Because there were maybe 10, 20 young people, and they all had spoken Czech. They were Czechs, and they spoke German just on account of me because I didn't understand enough Czech, and that embarrassed me. So that wasn't too much of a success either. And I was a loner. I started to do magic tricks. In case I forget, please remind me. It saved my life later. I bought some tricks from Janus Bartel in Hamburg, and from Friedrich in Berlin, and some magic store in Vienna. And I stood for hours in front of a large mirror and did the magic tricks. Now, living in one room, I mean, my parents were very tolerant. I mean, to have my little magic tricks in the shoe boxes. And my father, even, I remember when the occasion arose, he bought me a second-hand tails suit, so I could look like a magician. Magic was at that time my outlet, I guess. Yeah.
You bought these through the mail?
Through
I
the
presume,
mail,
no?
yes. And I did not know any other magicians or anybody who had that hobby.
What were the general relationships between people who were living in such close quarters and away from home under stress?
Well, it brought me maybe closer to my parents. My parents, especially my mother, felt sorry for me that I had to spend my youth, or good part of my youth, or good years, in a life like this, without many friends, without having the normal things kids do, go to a dance or go to a movie, or they felt sorry for me. It brought me maybe closer together. Also, my father, didn't speak Czech, hardly any. I mean, so I was like an interpreter for him when the occasion arose. I remember once he went to an auction. I don't know what he wanted. I think he wanted to buy a painting or something. And he didn't know how to bid. Though I bid, I was a young kid, and it was my first auction. And let's say I said 70 crowns, and I heard the auctioneer yell 70 crowns, and I bid 75 crowns. I overbid myself, until everybody started to laugh, and then it dawned on me. At that occasion, I bought a silver powder dose, a tree like the women had in Europe. You had where you had your rouge, your powder,
Oh,
and
compact.
a compact made of silver, and one part was the powder, and the other part was a mirror. I had it engraved Emma, which was my mother's name, and I still have it. It's in the safe.
Did you have contact with your family in Germany?
Yes, there was regular letter by letter. We could write. They were censored, the letters, somehow, usually, because it was not part of Germany. It was called the Reichsprotektorat Böhmen-Mähren, a territory protected by Böhmen, Bohemia, Moravia, but it was under the complete control of the Nazis, of the Germans.
Did you get newspapers, or did you have a radio?
You could buy, yes, you had a radio. You could buy You could buy newspapers. The newspapers were very originally, before the Germans entered Czechoslovakia, were very anti-Nazi. Of course, that changed the minute the Germans occupied Czechoslovakia.
And what radio stations did you get?
Well, all the radio stations originally were in Czech, but then we did not get any, to the best of my knowledge, we did not get any foreign radio stations. At one time, or a couple of times, we got old issues of the German Jewish newspaper published in New York, which still exists, called Aufbau, Reconstruction, and which had a lot of news on about the refugees in refugees who had arrived in the United States from Germany and Czechoslovakia, which was of great interest to us. It gave a picture, it gave a description. It gave a description of life of the refugees and advertisements. I mean, we devoured it like really. We were interested in writing and rewrite it and rewrite it. It was written in German.
When did all this change?
Well, at that time, the change was pretty fast. I mean, much more sudden than from 1933 to 1936, because here are the Germans, they occupied Germany, Czechoslovakia from one day to the next. The Czech population were either neutral or showed their hate as much as they could for the Germans. The Germans were very much disliked by the Czech population. But there were some German Nazis, of course, living in Brünn. And one of them, I remember next door, he was like the custodian for that building. And after he was a real Nazi, and his wife. And after the Germans occupied Brünn, a week later, he was the manager of a bank, the overseer of a bank. I mean, he had no idea. He was just put in to look over the shoulders of the Czech employees. We received the notice that we had to report to a school. That was the end of November, 1941.
1941.
1941.
So this was after the war began.
It was after the war had begun already. After the war had begun, as you know, in 1939, and my brother immigrated from Stuttgart. He had a lower number, and he was lucky via Spain. He immigrated in the summer of 1941 to the United States, from Stuttgart, from Germany.
Let me go back then. Where were you when the war broke out? In 39 in Brno?
1939, I was in Brünn.
What do you remember of that? How did it affect?
Well, we had, he wasn't actually a friend, he was an acquaintance who was a communist, Jewish communist. He was the only one. I mean, everybody else was a social democrat. And he said, now that will be the end of Hitler very fast. Russia will get him down. That I remember. We all, it was no question for us that Germany would lose the war. We were optimists in that respect. And we thought of it as the beginning of the end for him. We welcomed in a way, because now a decision will be made. Now he will be toppled either by the Germans or by the British or French.
Were you aware of what was happening to Polish Jewry?
In 1940, Polish Jewry living in Germany, 1939 and 1940, were arrested, deported, put at the border of Poland, and just say, here's Poland, go, walk.
Did you know anyone in that category?
Yes, I knew a girl, I forgot her name, she was an amateur dancer, I mean, she liked dancing. Feuerlicht, I think was her name.
But were you aware of concentration camps or ghettos
No.
in Poland
No,
and the
no.
persecution of Jews?
no.
So that you lived the first
al-
period
als-
of time up until 41, and you had to report to this school? The same?
School? Yes, we had a report. We got notice. I don't know how we got a notice. Whether a messenger came or by mail or whatever, that we had a report on a certain day to a school, and we knew we would be deported.
How did you know?
Well, because at that time, I think, we were the first transport from Brünn. We knew we were told we had to go to a work camp. Since Jews could not work, we were put to a camp where we had to work. And the people, to the best of my knowledge, were selected by the Jewish authorities. They were only responsible to get 1,000 people or so together.
Yeah.
The
What
Germans
was that
didn't
called? Was that a Judenrat, or did it have another name in Brno?
What was called, excuse me?
The Jewish authorities, were they a Judenrat?
Gemeinderat. I
Gemeinderat.
think Gemeinderat.
And who was the
I
head
don't
of it?
remember any names.
Did you know anyone in there?
No, we didn't have any connections. I mean,
Was one able to use connections not to be deported?
I would imagine, I mean, if I'm in charge and you are my sister, I wouldn't deport you here. I would protect you. It's only natural. I don't hold that against anybody.
What other powers did this Gemeinde have? What other responsibilities did they have?
They got children together for children transport to England, for which I was selected. And unfortunately, when I was interrogated or questioned, I should say, I told them that I have an affidavit to go to the United States, and for that reason I was trapped. They took somebody else who had no affidavit, which I can't blame anybody either. I mean, this is the way the ball bounces. We had a report. My father had borrowed or rented a cart, which we were permitted to take 40 or 50 pounds of belongings along.
Each?
Each.
Or as a family?
Each. You were not permitted to take any pillows from a couch or so. You could not, in other words, a couch without the pillows would have less value. My mother, typical my mother, when we were ready to leave, she swept before because she wanted to leave the place clean.
Okay, I'm going to change our tape again.